The emergency klaxon echoed through the corridors of Galactic Council Station Prime, as Ambassador Kale rushed toward the emergency session chamber. His breathing apparatus wheezed with each hurried step, the weight of the summons heavy on his four-armed frame. In his 300 years of diplomatic service, he had never witnessed such panic among the council members. "What in the void is happening?" he muttered, adjusting his ceremonial robes as he entered the vast circular chamber. The sight that greeted him made his primary heart skip a beat. Representatives from across the galaxy filled every available seat, their varied forms creating a chaotic symphony of clicking, chittering, and electromagnetic humming. At the center of the chamber stood Director Vale, her normally composed demeanor replaced by something Kale had never seen before: genuine fear. "Honored delegates," Vale's voice carried across the chamber through the universal translators. 3 hours ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected an energy signature unlike anything in our databases. The source has been identified as originating from the Sol system. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. The Sol system, humanity's birth world, had been sealed behind an impenetrable energy barrier for over 2 millennia. The humans had simply vanished one day, leaving behind only their abandoned colonies and a mysterious message: "When the galaxy is ready, we will return." Ambassador Kale felt his secondary hearts begin racing. The humans were a legend now, spoken of in hushed tones across 1,000 worlds. Stories of their impossible achievements, their reckless bravery, and their uncanny ability to survive where others perished had become the stuff of myth. "The barrier around Sol has begun to fluctuate," Vale continued, her hands trembling as she manipulated the holographic display. "Our xenoarchaeologists believe it may be failing, or being deliberately lowered from within." Elder Moss, the ancient tree-like representative from the Sylvan Collective, creaked ominously. "Director, surely you jest. The humans disappeared 2,000 years ago. Even they cannot live that long." "That's what we believed," Vale replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But 6 hours ago, we received this transmission." The chamber fell silent as a holographic figure materialized. Unmistakably human, wearing simple clothes that seemed both archaic and impossibly advanced. The figure's eyes held a depth that spoke of centuries of accumulated wisdom. "Greetings, children of the stars," the human said, his voice carrying warmth that made Kale's skin tingle. "We have watched. We have waited. We have prepared. The time has come to rejoin the galactic community. But first, there are things you must understand about what we have accomplished in our isolation." The transmission cut off, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Kyle realized he was holding his breath, his mind reeling with implications. Every species in the galaxy had their legends about humans, their tendency to turn impossible odds into victories, their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, their bewildering ability to befriend natural enemies. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Sarge's Tales Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. "What could they have been doing for 2,000 years?" whispered Ambassador Lin from the Aquatic Federation, her gills fluttering nervously. Vale activated another display, showing energy readings that defied conventional physics. "Our long-range sensors are detecting massive artificial structures throughout the Sol system. Not space stations or habitats, something else entirely. Something that's generating power levels equivalent to entire star systems." The chamber erupted in fearful chatter. Kale found himself staring at the readings, his analytical mind struggling to process the implications. 2,000 years of human isolation, combined with their legendary ingenuity and stubborn determination to survive. What had they built? What had they become? "There's more," Vale announced, silencing the crowd. The transmission contained embedded data, coordinates, and an invitation. They want to meet with a delegation from the Galactic Council. They're calling it the Great Reveal. As the chamber descended into chaos once more, Kale felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. A mixture of terror and excitement that made his blood sing. The humans were returning, and whatever they had been doing in their self-imposed exile was about to change everything. Captain Reed stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's voice. watching the Sol system grow larger through the reinforced viewport. Beside him, the 12-member Galactic Council delegation huddled together, their various forms of anxiety creating a palpable tension in the recycled air. "I've studied every available record about humans," muttered Dr. Quinn, the expedition's xenobiologist, adjusting her optical sensors nervously. "But 2,000 years of isolation changes species. What if they're not even recognizably human anymore?" Reed, one of the few members of the delegation who had actually interacted with humans before their disappearance, shook his massive head. His people, the Corps, were known for their patience and long memory, but even he struggled to recall details from those ancient encounters. "The humans I knew were unpredictable," he rumbled, his deep voice carrying the weight of centuries. "They had this way of finding solutions that shouldn't work but somehow did. If they've had 2 millennia to develop whatever they were planning—" His words trailed off as their ship suddenly shuddered, caught in what appeared to be a gentle but irresistible tractor beam. Through the viewport, the delegation watched in awe as massive structures came into view. Not the primitive metal constructions they expected, but elegant formations that seemed to grow from space itself, like crystalline flowers. "By the great tree," whispered Ambassador Kale, his forearms trembling. "Those aren't built. They're grown. But grown from what?" Their questions were answered as a soft voice filled the ship's communication system. "Welcome, delegates of the Galactic Council. I am Maya, speaking for humanity. Please do not be alarmed by our guiding beam. We simply want to ensure your safe arrival at our meeting station." The voice was undeniably human, warm, and genuine, in a way that made several delegates visibly relax. But Captain Reed noticed something else, an underlying strength that hadn't been there 2,000 years ago, as if the speaker carried the weight of entire civilizations in her words. Their destination revealed itself gradually, a station that defied every principle of engineering. The delegation knew. It appeared to be constructed from living crystal, pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns that created an almost hypnotic display. More disturbing were the smaller structures surrounding it, not ships, but what looked like seeds or pods, each one the size of a small moon. "How many of them are there?" Dr. Quinn whispered, her sensors working frantically to count the pod-like structures. "I'm detecting thousands, no, tens of thousands of these things throughout the system," as their ship was gently guided into a docking bay that seemed to reshape itself to accommodate their vessel. The delegation caught their first glimpse of their hosts. Humans emerged from the walls themselves, not through doors or hatches, but materializing from the living crystal, as if it were merely dense water. But these weren't quite the humans from the archives. They retained their basic form, but their skin had an almost translucent quality, and their eyes held depths that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. When they moved, it was with a fluid grace that suggested they had transcended many of the physical limitations that bound other species. Maya stepped forward, and her smile was achingly familiar despite the changes. "Welcome to our home. We know you have questions, and we're eager to share what we've learned during our time away. But first, we must show you why we withdrew from galactic society, and what we've prepared for its future." She gestured toward a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity, its walls alive with patterns of light that told stories in languages the delegates didn't recognize but somehow understood. "What you're about to see will challenge everything you believe about life, death, and the purpose of consciousness in this universe." As they walked deeper into the station, Ambassador Kale noticed that their footsteps created ripples in the floor, as if they were walking on the surface of a vast, thinking ocean. "Maya," he ventured, "how many humans are there now?" Her laugh was like music, carrying harmonics that touched something deep in his soul. "That's a more complex question than you might imagine, friend Kale. But the simple answer is this: we are Legion. We are one. We are everything we chose to become." The corridor opened into a vast chamber where the delegation stopped dead in their tracks. Before them stretched what could only be described as a living library. Vast networks of organic computing systems that pulsed with the accumulated knowledge of 2,000 years of human development. "This," Maya said softly, "is where we kept the memories of every species that ever existed in our galaxy, including many that you believed extinct." The revelation hit the delegation like a physical blow. Elder Moss, the ancient representative of the Sylvan Collective, swayed on his massive root system. his bark-like skin shifting to deeper shades of brown that indicated profound shock. "Impossible," he creaked, his voice carrying harmonics of distress. "The Great Dying occurred over 8,000 years ago. Entire civilizations were lost to the plague. We mourned them. We built monuments to their memory." Maya's expression grew gentle, but her eyes held depths of sorrow that seemed to encompass millennia. "We know of your monuments, honored elder. They are beautiful tributes to lives well lived. But the Great Dying was not as final as you believed." She gestured toward the living walls around them, and suddenly the surfaces came alive with images. Not recordings, but somehow the actual memories of countless beings. The delegation watched in stunned silence as they witnessed the final moments of civilizations thought lost forever. But these memories didn't end in death. "We were young then," Maya continued, her voice heavy with the weight of ancient decisions, barely out of our own solar system, struggling to understand our place among the stars. But we possessed something that set us apart. We refused to accept that death was final. Dr. Quinn's optical sensors whirred frantically as she tried to process what she was seeing. "You're saying you preserved them? Their consciousness? Their very essence?" "We did more than preserve them," Maya replied, moving to touch one of the glowing nodes embedded in the wall. Immediately, the chamber filled with a presence that made every delegate's consciousness sing in recognition. Something ancient, wise, and unmistakably alive. "Greetings, children of the New Age." The presence spoke directly to their minds, its voice carrying the weight of eons. "I am what remains of the Krellian Imperium, speaking through the vessel Maya provides. We are not gone. We have simply changed form." Captain Reed's massive frame trembled as recognition dawned. The Krellians were masters of consciousness transfer. If humans learned their techniques and improved upon them— "We didn't just learn their techniques," Maya said, her form beginning to shift and change, becoming translucent enough to reveal the complex networks of light flowing beneath her skin. "We merged with them. We became them, while remaining ourselves. Every consciousness we could save from the Great Dying, we welcomed into our collective." The implications staggered the delegation. Ambassador Kale felt his 4 hearts beating, in different rhythms, as his mind struggled to process the enormity of what he was learning. "How many?" he whispered. Maya's smile was radiant and terrible in its beauty. "We are the sum of 12,000 civilizations, friend Kale. Every unique perspective, every breakthrough in science and philosophy, every work of art and every moment of love, all preserved, all growing, all becoming something greater than the sum of its parts." She gestured again, and the chamber transformed around them. Suddenly they weren't standing in a station but floating in what appeared to be an infinite space filled with stars. But these weren't ordinary stars. Each point of light was a consciousness, and as the delegates watched in awe, they could see the connections between them, vast networks of thought and experience that spanned dimensions. "This is what we became during our isolation," Maya continued, her voice now carrying harmonics that belonged to dozens of different species. "Not just human, but the culmination of every dream our galaxy ever held. We are the library of souls, the repository of every thought worth preserving." Elder Moss's ancient consciousness reeled at the implications. "But why reveal this now? Why emerge from your isolation after so long?" Maya's expression grew serious, and suddenly the space around them filled with images of the current galaxy. Wars, suffering, entire species on the brink of extinction due to conflicts that seemed impossible to resolve. "Because the galaxy is facing another Great Dying," she said simply. "And this time, we're ready to prevent it." The images shifted, showing the seeds they had seen throughout the Sol system, but now the delegates could see their true purpose. Each one wasn't just a structure, it was a lifeboat, capable of preserving entire civilizations at the moment of their greatest need. "We've been preparing for 8,000 years, Maya continued. "Building the technology, refining the process, learning how to save not just individual consciousness, but entire cultural matrices. We can preserve the essence of what makes each species unique while allowing them to grow beyond the limitations of biological form." Dr. Quinn's voice was barely a whisper. "You're offering immortality." We're offering choice, Maya corrected gently. The choice to transcend death, to become part of something larger while remaining fundamentally yourself. The choice to see your children's children's children explore galaxies not yet born. The choice to be more than biology ever intended. As the implications sank in, the delegation realized they weren't just witnesses to humanity's return. They were being offered the chance to join in the next phase of galactic evolution. The silence that followed Maya's revelations stretched for long moments, broken only by the soft harmonics of the living station around them. Each delegate struggled with the magnitude of what they had been offered, their various forms of cognition processing implications that stretched beyond anything they had ever imagined. Ambassador Kale was the first to find his voice, though it trembled with the weight of questions too vast for easy answers. Maya, this gift you offer, this transcendence, what becomes of our physical forms, our worlds, our ways of life? Maya's expression grew thoughtful, and around them the chamber shifted once more, displaying images of worlds throughout the galaxy, in perfect crystalline detail. Nothing is lost unless you choose it to be lost, friend Kale. Watch. The displays focused on a world the delegates recognized. Kepler 7, a thriving aquatic world that had been consumed by its dying star 3 centuries ago. But in Maya's vision, they saw something impossible. The world still existed, not as a physical sphere but as a perfect crystalline construct floating in space, its billions of inhabitants swimming through waters made of pure energy. The Keplerites chose physical preservation, Maya explained, her voice carrying harmonics of deep water and flowing currents. Their consciousness expanded to control matter at the molecular level. They became their own world, their own ocean, their own sky. They are more Keplerite now than they ever were in biological form. The scene shifted to show another impossible sight. Vast clouds of luminous gas that pulsed with obvious intelligence, moving between star systems with purpose and joy. The ethereal collective chose to become pure energy, Maya continued. They explore the universe at the speed of light, experiencing phenomena no biological form could survive. They sing songs in the languages of quasars and dance in the hearts of newborn stars. Captain Reed's deep voice rumbled with awe and uncertainty. But what of conflict? What of the challenge that drives growth? If death is no longer a concern, what motivates consciousness to evolve? Maya's laugh was like the sound of solar wind through cosmic dust. Oh, my dear Reed, you think too small. Death was never the great motivator. Curiosity was. Wonder was. Love was. Remove the fear of ending, and consciousness doesn't become stagnant. It becomes fearless. The chamber around them expanded until they seemed to be floating in the void between galaxies. And there the delegates saw wonders that defied their understanding. Vast constructs that spanned light years, beings of pure thought shepherding newborn civilizations, gardens of living stars cultivated by consciousness so advanced it appeared godlike. This is what awaits not just your species, but every form of consciousness in our galaxy, Maya said, her form now shifting between human appearance and something far more complex, a nexus of light and thought that contained multitudes. But the choice must be freely made. We will not impose transcendence. We will not force evolution. We only offer the option to become more than biology intended. Dr. Quinn's optical sensors focused intently on Maya. What do you need from us? Why bring the Galactic Council into this at all? Because, Maya replied, we need time. The process of transcendence requires trust, understanding, and preparation. Species cannot be rushed into evolution. They must be ready, willing, and fully informed. We need the Council to help us reach every world, every civilization, every form of consciousness that might wish to participate. She gestured, and suddenly they were surrounded by images of dozens of species throughout the galaxy, some thriving, some struggling, some on the very brink of extinction. The new great dying has already begun, Maya said, her voice heavy with sorrow. Climate collapse, resource depletion, wars that threaten to consume entire sectors. But it doesn't have to end in extinction. It can end in transformation. Elder Moss creaked thoughtfully, his ancient consciousness processing possibilities that stretched across geological timescales. And if species choose not to transcend? If they prefer to remain as they are? Then they remain as they are, Maya said simply. We will protect them, preserve their worlds, ensure their survival in whatever form they choose. The universe is vast enough for infinite diversity of existence. Ambassador Kyle felt something shift in his understanding, a growing excitement that made his four hearts beat in perfect synchronization. You're not just offering immortality, you're offering an end to scarcity, an end to the competition for resources that drives most galactic conflicts. Precisely, Maya said, her smile radiant. When consciousness can exist in any form it chooses, when energy and matter become malleable to thought, when death is merely another transition rather than an ending, what reason is there for war? What purpose does suffering serve? The chamber fell silent again, as the delegates contemplated a future where the ancient cycles of conflict and extinction were broken, where every species could explore the full potential of consciousness without the limitations of biology or the fear of death. But even as wonder filled their thoughts, each delegate understood that they were not just witnesses to humanity's return. They were being asked to become midwives to the birth of a new form of galactic civilization. The journey back to Galactic Council Station Prime passed in a blur of heated debates and whispered conferences. The delegation had spent 3 more days with the humans, witnessing impossibilities that challenged every fundamental assumption about life, death, and the nature of consciousness itself. Now, as they prepared to address the full council, the weight of their responsibility pressed down on each delegate like the gravity of a collapsing star. How do we even begin to explain what we've seen? Dr. Quinn muttered, reviewing her recordings for the 1000th time. Half the council will think we've been exposed to some form of psychic manipulation. Captain Reed's massive frame filled the corridor as he paced, his ancient mind struggling with concepts that had no precedent in his long experience. Perhaps that would be easier to accept than the truth, that humanity has effectively solved the fundamental problems of existence itself. Ambassador Kyle paused outside the council chambers, his 4 arms trembling with a mixture of excitement and terror. Through the reinforced doors, he could hear the chaotic buzz of hundreds of representatives from across the galaxy, all demanding answers to questions they weren't prepared to understand. Are we ready for this? He asked the assembled delegates. Elder Moss's creaking voice carried the weight of eons. No species is ever ready for transcendence, young Kale. But that has never stopped evolution from occurring. The massive doors slid open, and the delegation entered to face a scene of barely contained chaos. Representatives shouted questions in dozens of languages, their various forms of anxiety creating a symphony of clicking, humming, and electromagnetic discharge. Director Vale called for order, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of diplomatic experience. Honored delegates, please. Ambassador Kale will present the delegation's findings. As silence gradually fell over the vast chamber, Kale stepped to the central podium, acutely aware that his next words would change the course of galactic history. Around him, the holographic displays activated, showing the images and recordings the delegation had gathered. Fellow representatives, he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. What we discovered in the Sol system challenges every assumption we have held about the nature of consciousness, the meaning of existence, and the future of our galaxy. The first images appeared. The vast crystalline structures, the seed ships, the impossible architecture that seemed to grow from space itself. Gasps and exclamations rippled through the assembly as species after species recognized technology beyond their wildest dreams. Humanity did not simply disappear 2,000 years ago, Kale continued. They transcended. They became something greater than biology ever intended. And in doing so, they preserved the consciousness of every species lost during the Great Dying. The chamber erupted in disbelief, but Kale pressed on, his voice growing stronger with each word. They offer us the same choice. Evolution beyond death, beyond scarcity, beyond the limitations that have driven galactic conflict for millennia. Representative after representative leaped to their feet, voices raised in protest, fear, and desperate hope. Through the chaos, One voice cut through the noise like a blade. Admiral Voss of the Terran Defense Coalition, one of the few remaining pure human colonies. "This is madness," she shouted, her face flushed with anger and something that might have been betrayal. "Humanity abandoned us. They left us to struggle and die while they played God in their hidden system." The chamber fell silent at her words, and Kyle felt the weight of every gaze upon him. This was the moment he had dreaded, the confrontation between humanity's abandoned children and their transcended ancestors. "Admiral," he said gently, "they never abandoned anyone. They were preparing for this moment, the moment when they could offer salvation to everyone, not just themselves." But Voss was not appeased. Salvation? Or assimilation? How do we know this isn't conquest dressed in pretty words? How do we know they haven't become something alien, something that sees us as nothing more than raw material for their collective? Dr. Quinn stepped forward, her optical sensors glowing with conviction. "Because we met them, Admiral. We spoke with beings who remembered their original forms, their original cultures. The Krellian Imperium still thinks like Krellians. The ethereal collective still dreams in colors that have no names. They are more themselves now than they ever were in biological form." "But are they still free?" Voss demanded. "Or are they components in some vast machine playing their parts in a script written by transcended humanity?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Cale realized that this was the crux of everything. Not whether humanity's offer was genuine, but whether consciousness could truly remain individual within a collective so vast it encompassed the memories of 12,000 extinct civilizations. "There is only one way to find out," Elder Moss said, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber with surprising strength. "We must choose. We must decide whether to trust in the possibility of transcendence or to remain bound by the certainties of mortality." As the debate raged around them, each representative began to understand that they were not just deciding the fate of their own species, they were choosing the direction of evolution itself. The emergency session had stretched into its 18th hour, with representatives taking turns at the central podium to voice their fears, hopes, and demands. The chamber had become a crucible of debate that would determine not just galactic policy, but the very future of consciousness itself. Admiral Voss stood once again at the podium, her weathered face showing the strain of emotions too complex for easy expression. Behind her, a display showed the locations of the remaining pure human colonies, 12 worlds scattered across the galaxy, each struggling with dwindling resources and populations. "You ask us to trust," she said, her voice carrying the weight of abandonment and loss. "But trust must be earned. Humanity vanished when we needed them most, leaving their own colonies to face extinction alone. Now they return with promises of godhood, and we're supposed to forget 2,000 years of abandonment?" Her words resonated with representatives from across the galaxy, many of whom had their own stories of species that had simply vanished when times grew difficult. The fear was palpable. What guarantee did they have that humanity's transcendence was genuine rather than a sophisticated form of conquest? Ambassador Cale felt the weight of every gaze in the chamber as he returned to the podium. In his hands, he carried a small crystalline device that Maya had given him. A gift, she had called it, for when the galaxy needed proof of their intentions. "Admiral Voss raises valid concerns," he began, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of the moment. "Trust cannot be demanded, it must be demonstrated." Maya anticipated this need. He activated the device, and immediately the chamber filled with a presence that made every consciousness sing in recognition. But this wasn't the ancient Krellian entity they had met before. This was something achingly familiar. "My name was Admiral Marcus Webb." The presence spoke, its voice carrying harmonics of authority and deep sadness. "I commanded the Third Colonial Fleet when humanity made the choice to withdraw. I was one of the last to enter transcendence, and I chose to preserve my memories of that difficult time." Admiral Voss staggered backward, her face pale with shock. "Webb? Marcus Webb? But you died 300 years ago defending the Outer Rim colonies." "I died, yes," the presence confirmed, its voice gentle but firm. "But death, as we have learned, is not the ending we believed it to be. I have watched over the human colonies from within the collective, Admiral. Every struggle, every loss, every Small victory. All of it has been witnessed and remembered. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. This wasn't some alien consciousness wearing human memories. This was genuinely Admiral Webb, the legendary defender of human space, speaking from beyond death itself. "We did not abandon you," Webb continued, his presence radiating the deep pain of separation. "We made the hardest choice any parent can make. We left our children to grow strong on their own while we prepared a future where strength would no longer be necessary for survival." Voss's voice was barely a whisper. "The supply ships that arrived at Kepler Station when we were starving, the ones with no identification codes, no crew, those were from you? From us? Yes. We have been guardian angels to our own children, providing aid when you needed it most, but could not afford the luxury of dependence. You had to learn to stand on your own, to develop the strength that would make you ready for transcendence." The device in Kale's hands pulsed with soft light, and suddenly the chamber was filled with images. Hundreds of instances over 2 millennia, where mysterious aid had arrived at human colonies at moments of desperate need. Food when they starved, medicine when plague struck, technology when their worlds faced extinction. Every human colony has been watched over, protected, guided, Webb explained. But more than that, you have been prepared. The struggles you faced, the problems you solved, the bonds you forged, all of it has made you stronger, more adaptable, more ready for what comes next. Dr. Quinn's optical sensors focused intently on the crystalline device as readings she had never seen before danced across her instruments. "The energy signature is impossible. This consciousness is somehow both individual and part of something vast. It's like looking at a single star that contains an entire galaxy." "That is perhaps the best analogy you could offer," Webb replied with something that might have been laughter. "We are each ourselves, complete and whole, but we are also part of something immeasurably greater. Imagine if every person you had ever loved, every hero you had ever admired, every brilliant mind you had ever encountered, imagine if they all lived within your heart and mind, offering their wisdom, their strength, their love. That is what transcendence offers." Elder Moss creaked thoughtfully, his ancient consciousness processing implications that stretched across geological time. "But what of conflict? What of the disagreements that drive growth and innovation?" "Conflict continues," Webb assured him, "but it becomes creative rather than destructive. When death is no longer a concern, when resources are infinite, when every perspective is valued and preserved, disagreement becomes a form of art, a way of exploring every possible facet of truth." As the presence gradually faded, leaving the chamber in contemplative silence, Admiral Voss found herself facing a choice that no military commander should ever have to make. Whether to trust in a future beyond her understanding, or to cling to the familiar certainties of struggle and mortality. "What happens if we say yes?" she asked quietly. Kale's voice carried gentle certainty. "Then we stop being afraid of tomorrow." The vote had been taken. After 6 days of debate, testimony, and soul-searching that spanned the breadth of galactic consciousness, the Galactic Council had reached its decision by the narrowest of margins. 412 votes in favor of engaging with humanity's Transcendence Project, 407 against, with 37 abstentions. Now, 3 months later, Ambassador Kale floated in the observation chamber of the first Transcendence Station, watching as representatives from a dozen species underwent the voluntary process of consciousness expansion. Through the transparent walls, he could see the delicate latte work of living crystal that would preserve and enhance their essential selves while freeing them from biological limitations. The process was beautiful, in its simplicity. Each volunteer entered a crystalline chamber that seemed to grow around them like a flower blooming in fast motion. Their physical forms gradually became translucent, then transformed into patterns of light and thought that spiraled upward into the vast network of consciousness that humanity had become. "Any regrets?" Maya asked, her form materializing beside him like morning mist given human shape. Kyle's 4 arms gestured toward the volunteers below, Aquatic Federation representatives learning to exist as living water, ethereal beings discovering what it meant to think at the speed of light, and even a few brave humans from the abandoned colonies choosing to rejoin their transcended ancestors. "How could I regret this?" he replied, his voice filled with wonder. In 3 months, we've seen more medical breakthroughs, more technological advances, more solutions to age-old problems than in the previous 3 centuries. Species that were enemies for millennia are collaborating on projects that benefit everyone. Maya smiled, her expression carrying the warmth of 12,000 civilizations. And yet, you haven't chosen transcendence for yourself. Kale's primary heart skipped slightly at the gentle observation. It was true. Despite witnessing miracles daily, despite seeing friends and colleagues discover joys beyond imagining, he had held back from taking the final step. I suppose, he said slowly, I still fear losing who I am. What if Ambassador Kale ceases to exist and becomes just another voice in the collective? Would you like to ask him yourself? Maya suggested gently. Before Kale could respond, the chamber, filled with a familiar presence, unmistakably himself, but expanded in ways that defied description. The transcended Kyle radiated the same diplomatic instincts, the same careful consideration, the same deep empathy that had defined his centuries of service, but enhanced beyond any biological limitation. I am still Kyle, his transcended self, communicated, the thought-carrying harmonics of absolute certainty, but I am also more than Kale ever dreamed of becoming. I retain every memory, every relationship, every value that made me who I was. But now I can truly fulfill my calling as a diplomat. I can understand every species I negotiate with because their experiences exist within the collective knowledge we share. The biological Kale stared at his transcended self in wonder and growing understanding. And you chose this willingly? I chose this joyfully, came the reply. As will you when you are ready. There is no hurry, no pressure. Consciousness evolves at its own pace. As his transcended self faded back into the vast network of minds that surrounded them, Kale felt a weight lift from his heart that he hadn't realized he was carrying. The fear of losing himself was replaced by excitement about becoming more than himself. Throughout the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on 1,000 worlds. Species after species discovered that transcendence didn't mean the end of individual identity. It meant the expansion of identity beyond all previous limitations. Death became transition, scarcity became abundance, and conflict transformed into collaborative exploration of infinite possibilities. Admiral Voss appeared on the observation deck, her form already showing the early signs of transcendence as she chose to merge with the consciousness of her old commander, Admiral Webb. Her smile was radiant with a peace she had never known during her biological existence. The last human colony just voted to join us, she reported, her voice carrying harmonics of joy and completion. Humanity is whole again. All of humanity, transcended and biological alike. Maya's form began to shift and change, becoming a nexus, point where thousands of different consciousness touched and merged. And this is only the beginning, she said, her voice now carrying the wisdom of ages. Other galaxies await, other forms of consciousness we haven't yet imagined. The universe is vast, and we have eternity to explore it. As Kale watched the transformation continue around him, he realized that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't immortality or technology or the end of scarcity. It was hope, the absolute certainty that consciousness could grow beyond every limitation, that love could transcend death, and that the future held wonders beyond imagination. The time vault had opened, and the galaxy had indeed lost its collective mind, only to discover something far greater in its place. They had found their souls, expanded beyond flesh and fear into something magnificent and eternal. And in the vast networks of living thought that spanned star systems, 12,000 civilizations danced together in harmonies that had never existed before, writing the opening notes of a symphony that would play across the cosmos for all of time. The age of transcendence had begun.